The silver tinsel hanging from our mahogany banister felt like a noose. My mother didn't even look at me as she adjusted her pearl necklace. She spoke to my reflection in the hallway mirror as if I were a smudge of dirt on an otherwise pristine surface. "You will stay in the servants' quarters behind the garden for the duration of the holiday," she said, her voice as cold as the December frost. "Julian is marrying into the Sterling bloodline tonight. They are the architects of this city's wealth. You, with your pain-stained fingers and your charity work in the slums, are a blemish we cannot afford to show. You aren't a daughter today. You are a liability. Stay out of sight or don't bother coming back at all." For 24 years, I had been the disappointment of the Vance family. My brother Julian was the golden child, a man who measured his worth in stock options and the sharpness of his suits. My parents, Arthur and Malene, were social climbers who had spent their entire lives trying to bridge the gap between well-to-do and untouchable elite. The Sterlings were the bridge. They were a family of ancient power, owners of the Sterling Global Foundation, and half the skyline. When Julian managed to charm Serafina Sterling, my parents acted as though they had won a divine mandate. But there was a condition to their social ascension: perfection. And in their eyes, I was the antithesis of perfection. I was an artist, yes, but specifically I worked in disaster relief and urban restoration. I spent my time in the trenches of the city rebuilding community centers and teaching children in the gray zones how to paint their dreams on the walls of their poverty. To my parents, this was shameful. They told our social circle I was studying abroad or indisposed with a delicate constitution. The truth was they were ashamed of my callous hands. Julian's future in-laws are coming for the Christmas Eve gala. My father had told me an hour earlier, slamming a check for a measly $1,000 onto the kitchen island. "Take this. Stay at a motel. We've told the Sterlings that Julian is an only child. It's better that way. Imagine their faces if they saw you, the daughter of a Vance, looking like a common laborer. You'd embarrass us into exile." I didn't take the money. I walked out to the small, unheated stone cottage at the edge of our estate, the old gardener's shed I had converted into a studio. I sat there in the dark, watching the lights of the main house flicker with the arrival of the city's most powerful people. I felt the sting of the betrayal, a cold, sharp blade of resentment carving my heart into something harder, something much more dangerous than the gentle artist they thought I was. The gala was in full swing. I could hear the muffled strains of a string quartet through the falling snow. I had no intention of going inside, but then I realized I had left my portfolio, the one containing my blueprints for the New Hope wing of the city hospital, on the library desk. It was months of work, and I was leaving this house for good tonight. I wouldn't leave my future in their hands. I slipped through the side servants' entrance, wearing my heavy paint-splattered work coat over a simple black turtleneck. I looked like a ghost haunting a palace. I moved through the shadows of the hallway, heading toward the library, which was supposed to be off-limits to the guests. But the library door was open. Inside stood the elite of the elite, Lord and Lady Sterling, their son Marcus, and my parents, who were bowing so low they looked like they might snap. Julian stood beside Serafina, pining like a peacock. "The Vance heritage is one of absolute refinement," my father was saying, his voice oily with desperation. "We believe in the preservation of the upper crust, just as you do, Lord Sterling." Lady Sterling, a woman with eyes like sharpened diamonds, didn't seem impressed. She was wandering the room, her gaze skimming over the expensive, soulless art my parents had bought to look cultured. Then her eyes landed on a small, dusty silver frame, tucked behind a vase of lilies on a high shelf. It was a photo my grandmother had taken 5 years ago. It was me standing in the middle of a collapsed village in the mountains of Nepal after the earthquake. I was covered in dust, blood on my forehead, holding 2 terrified children in my arms. I wasn't a socialite in that photo. I was a savior. My parents had tried to hide it, but they had forgotten it in their rush to scrub the house of my existence. Lady Sterling froze. She reached up, her hand trembling slightly, and pulled the frame down. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice cutting through the room like a bell. "Who is this?" My mother rushed forward, her face pale. "Oh, that's just a distant cousin's girl. A tragic case, really. Mentally unstable. She ran off to do missionary work. We keep the photo out of a sense of Christian charity, but she's quite shameful, really. She's nothing to us." I stood in the doorway, my breath hitching in my throat. I saw the look on Lady Sterling's face. It wasn't disgust. It was a holy, terrifying awe. Shameful. Lord Sterling stepped forward, looking over his wife's shoulder. His eyes widened. He looked at the photo, then looked up, his gaze scanning the room until it landed directly on me, shivering in the shadows of the hallway. Lady Sterling screamed. The sound was so loud the string quartet in the ballroom stopped playing. The entire gala seemed to tilt on its axis. My parents turned, their faces contorting in horror. "Bolera, get out!" my father hissed, stepping toward me as if to physically shove me back into the dark. "I told you to stay in the shed. You've ruined everything." But he never reached me. Marcus Sterling, the heir to the Sterling Empire, moved faster than I had ever seen a man move. He stepped between me and my father, his arm acting as a barrier of pure steel. "Touch her," Marcus said, his voice a low, vibrating growl. "And I will ensure the Vance name is erased from every bank and social register in this hemisphere by dawn." Lady Sterling ran to me. She didn't care about her silk gown or the mud on my coat. She threw her arms around me and sobbed into my shoulder. "We have looked for you for 3 years, she wept. "The angel of the rubble. The woman who stayed behind when the helicopters couldn't land. The woman who saved my son's life in the mountains when the doctors had given up." The silence in the room was absolute, save for the sound of my mother's wine glass shattering on the floor. Saved. Marcus's life. Julian stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "But she's an embarrassment. She lives in a shed." Lord Sterling turned to my father, his expression one of pure, unadulterated loathing. "You told us Julian was an only child. You told us your family was built on a refinement. But you housed a hero in a shed. You called the woman who gave our son back to us shameful." "We didn't know," my mother wailed, clutching at Lady Sterling's sleeve. "We thought she was just being rebellious. Tell them we love you." I looked at my mother. I looked at the woman who 20 minutes ago told me I was a liability. I looked at my father, who had offered me $1,000 to disappear. Then I looked at Marcus Sterling, whose life I had saved in a dark, cold tent in the Himalayas, never knowing he was a billionaire, only knowing he was a human in pain. I stepped back, pulling away from my mother's desperate reach. "I am the embarrassment, remember," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I have paint on my hands. I have the dirt of the real world on my shoes. I wouldn't want to stain your perfect Christmas." "Please," Julian pleaded, realizing his marriage and his meal ticket were evaporating. "We're family." "Family is a verb, Julian, not a noun," I replied. I turned to Lord and Lady Sterling. "I am leaving tonight. I have a community center to finish, and I don't need the Vance name to do it." "You won't have to," Lord Sterling said, glaring at my father. "Because as of tonight, the Sterling Foundation is pulling all investments from Vance Holdings. We do not partner with people who discard their own blood for the sake of a polished image." The revenge was silent, but it was total. In the span of 5 minutes, my parents had gone from the brink of joining the elite to the abyss of social and financial ruin. They had traded a daughter for a shadow, and now the shadow was gone. "Marcus," I said softly, "I need a ride anywhere but here." Marcus smiled, a genuine, warm expression that didn't belong in this cold house. He took my hand, my callous, shameful hand, and kissed the knuckles. I've been waiting 3 years to give you a lift. Let's go. As we walked out through the front doors, past the gaping guests and the weeping ruins of my parents' ambitions, I didn't look back. The snow was still falling, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't cold. I was free. And as the Sterling's car pulled away, I watched the lights of the Vance estate fade into the distance. A glittering palace built on lies now crumbling under the weight of the truth. The end.